Perfume on the radio.
On lookout, FM.
The game stopped gamble. The dream was big. It smelt fantastic, in the thick of it, like a bare-chested, crisp-shirted, fougere, fragranced fancy man. We are in the money. Adrenaline overdrive. Effervescent, energetic, hopeful. Salty, sticky keyboards. Snacks and sweaty pits. Fast money getting faster. Big dreams getting bigger. Sleepless nights, unwashed polyester sheets. Passing days muddled. Forgetting to shower. The anticipation is impossible.
That was perfumer and filmmaker Donna Lipowitz sharing an aromatic meditation on stock market gambling. She joined us to kick off our 5th episode of Perfume on the Radio, where we explore humanity's most delicious topic, vice. Now, to start this off, I want to be super clear. Vice is in the eye of the beholder, and so we engage in this subject with a little bit of critical remove. Having said that, this show is definitely adult-themed. If there are any kids listening, for instance, now might be a good time to make sure it's okay with your parents, because we'll be covering topics relating to intoxicating substances and, of course, humanity's favorite pastime, sex. Perfume on the Radio is a bi-monthly program presented by the Institute for Art and Olfaction, which is a nonprofit devoted to experimentation and access in the field of perfumery. We're based here in Los Angeles, where honestly everyone seems a little bit depressed these days, so I hope this episode changes that because we have some very fantastic and fascinating people joining us today. I'm Saskia Wilson-Brown, and I'll be hosting this episode, which we are calling The Vice Show. Let's not delay our pleasures anymore, and let's get started. Our first guest is historian James McHugh, an expert on the cultural and material history of pre-modern India. His first book was called Sandalwood and Carrion, and it was about the sense of smell and the use of aromatics in South Asian religions. He's currently working on a second book which explores alcohol in the same region. James joined us from LA, and I started the conversation asking him about the written records of intoxication in pre-modern India. Here's James.
There's materials about intoxicating substances of sorts and states of intoxication, going back as long as the written sources that we can decipher, at least these ancient Sanskrit sources like the Vedas. There's references to this sort of mystery lost drug called soma, which causes some kind of state, some altered mental state. And there's references, very ancient references to a drink as well, and what's clearly an alcoholic drink. That's called surah.
Surah, the drink's called surah.
Yes.
And do they know what that drink was?
Well, it changes over time. The earliest surahs seem to be made of, cereal grains, and they're quite complicated. They have various components of different sprouted grains and other things that we're not sure what they are because we've just got the word for them, but they're probably some kind of fermentation starter type mixture, maybe herbs or something. We don't really know.
And what about soma? Does anybody have any idea what soma is?
There's so much ink spilled over the soma mystery. It's kind of amazing. Some people propose a sort of stimulant like ephedra. There's a famous proposal for this fly agaric mushroom. And recently somebody's proposed a sort of mixture of herbs that might have acted like ayahuasca. But you get into all this kind of complicated sort of methodological stuff, though, about, how are you going to read these descriptions of people on soma and then extrapolate to, they must have taken X type of drug, right, which is found in Y plant, or are you going to go from descriptions of it as twiggy, or are you going to go for like where various people use soma in soma-like rituals today and see what the plants they use are or what they look like in terms of the plants. It's a whole thing. Soma is a ritual drug that you offer to the gods, and the gods seem to, especially the chief of the gods, this god Indra, seems to like soma. It sort of makes him sort of feisty and warlike. You don't get the sense that people were sort of doing recreational soma, and in terms of like, if we have any sense of what regular people were doing as an intoxicant just sort of in everyday life, it seems that surah was the more common one.
For the everyday people in pre-modern India, would intoxication have been considered a vice?
It's complicated. I mean, there's various groups of people just weren't allowed to take alcohol, for example. So the priestly class, Brahmins, or say people like Buddhist nuns. But then within the class of people who were sort of theoretically permitted to have this, there's a sense that it's okay so long as you don't overdo it. So there is a concept not dissimilar to our vice concept. And there's various types of vices. There's a group of vices that are produced from desire. There's desire vices. And they're all things that also cause, let's loosely call it intoxication. They're things that put you in this state of, sort of frenzied intoxication. So the things that cause this intoxication, this state, and which can become a vice if you get too into them, too attached to them, do them too often, too much, they are drinking, women, having sex with women, gambling and hunting. And so those are the 4 desire vices. Those can all become a bit of a sort of obsession of desire. But it's not quite the same as our modern concept of addiction, because it's more about you willfully, desirously keep going back to them. It's not like you're kind of, in the thrall of these things entirely.
So there's an implication of choice.
Yes. These things, they're kind of often seen as productive and good when they're sort of done in moderation, but it's if you overdo them, they'll take over other parts of your life, like sort of your duties towards family, your economic duties. A lot of these discussions of vice are actually aimed at kings. So, you don't want the king gambling and drinking too much when he should be, doing kingly things, as it were. Right. So that's often the context for these discussions.
Are there any stories of intoxication, or I guess maybe these 4 vices that come to mind as particularly stand out or interesting?
There's a lot. They come up in all sorts of things. There's a really fascinating sort of demonic personification of intoxication, and that myth's told numerous times, in fact. Basically, there's a sage who's got into an argument with a god, and the god's kind of powerful, and the sage, the human sage, kind of to, not be defeated by the god, sort of conjures up this big demonic creature who is intoxication. And this kind of means that the sage kind of wins the argument. And they've got this problem of what do we do with this demon? You can't just, get rid of it. It's sort of there now. It's part of the universe. In the very earliest version of that story, they put that demon in Syrah, in that ancient beer. And then in a slightly later version, they kind of placed that demon in gambling, hunting, women, and drinking. And then there's a much later, just about 1,000 years ago version from Kashmir, where this intoxication demonic force is found in all sorts of things, like the tongues of diplomats and the beauty of peacock feathers and things like that. That is very sort of satirical text attacking all sorts of people in Kashmiri society at the time. This next story, when anybody in sort of ancient and medieval India they want to allude to the fact that drinking too much can completely destroy everything in your life, they'll just sort of mention this story. This is kind of Krishna's clansmen, not Krishna himself, but they're all sort of living in a city, Krishna's ruling them. And there's a load of young men one day, they dress up one of the men and pretend he's pregnant. They dress him as a woman and put a sort of, I don't know, I can't remember what it is now. It's like a cushion or something. They put something on his stomach, and there's these sages visiting, these powerful sort of mystical, supernatural power type sages appear. And they kind of go up to the sages and go, "Oh, wise sages, can you tell us, will it be a girl or a boy that she's carrying?" The sages don't fall for it, and this sage says, "I curse you, cheeky young man, that you will give birth to a huge iron club." And the next day he does, which they don't describe how that all happens in fact, but there's been a prediction that this clan will all be destroyed. And so they realize, oh, this is it. So they smash it up into sort of powder and just sort of get rid of it. But people are a bit worried that maybe something bad's going to happen. So actually they ban drinking in the kingdom. And then one day they want to kind of have this sort of festival. Even though drinking's banned, they actually take a load of booze with them, and they go off to the sort of beach basically. And so they get drinking. It's kind of classic. They kind of start arguing and fighting in, very modern sounding ways. And it gets really nasty, and, father will be fighting son, and, everyone's fighting everyone, and they basically mutually kill each other. But when anyone, whether it's a Buddhist or a Jain text or a Hindu text, anyone goes, drinking can be really bad and disastrous, they'll always mention that story.
Wow.
But what's important in that story is, by Hindu traditional law, that group of men were technically allowed to drink. So some people in very classical Hindu law, like Brahmins, forbidden to drink. That group of people would be permitted to drink. So it's legal drinking, and it just shows that even when permitted to drink and heroic good people, it can go horribly wrong.
First night when I went home, drunk as I could be.
That was James McHugh, who is a professor at the University of Southern California and joined us from his home in Los Angeles.
Come here, honey.
Our next guest is another Angelino. Persephenie opened her aromatic studio in 2004 and has been teaching scent-related classes since 2006. She finds inspiration in traditional techniques for perfumery and incense and enjoys researching how different cultures made use of raw materials in their areas. I asked Persephenie how tobacco would have been used in historic cultures. Here's what she had to say.
Well, first, I want to say that the medicinal use of smoke outnumbers all the other uses of smoke. And tobacco has been a smoking ritual in the Americas before it was cultivated. It's indigenous to the Americas and the Caribbean. Burning smoke was part of a shaman's ritual healing to diagnose and cure illness, and also to repel what they thought were evil spirits that caused the sickness. And also, of course, the most important was to communicate with the spirits. The Native Americans' traditional use of smoke was to communicate and ask for wisdom.
And so they would have used tobacco as well as other aromatics burning. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Other herbs. Two herbs that we know really well are sweetgrass and white sage. And there's this tale that sweetgrass was added in with the tobacco because all spirits absolutely love sweetgrass and it brings in the positive. But one didn't want to communicate with the bad spirits, which would also be brought in. So a little bit of white sage was also added because the white sage would dispel the bad spirits.
So at what stage do you think tobacco started to get used more, as we understand it, in modern culture? Was that when it started getting exported to Europe, do you think?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, people were smoking just to smoke for pleasure and relaxation here in the Americas as well. But Columbus, I think, was offered it in the 1490s, and then it was introduced to the Europeans as sort of this panacea medicine. It was like the cure-all. So every sickness you had there, they said tobacco was gonna heal you. And then it became something that, for those who could afford it, this pleasurable thing. And then it began to be a widespread addictive culture habit.
For a lot of people, the smell of burnt tobacco is an unpleasant smell. But then I know in perfumery, it's used quite commonly. Could you tell me a little bit about the difference between the burnt tobacco smell and tobacco absolute?
Tobacco absolute is really likable. It has more of a sort of sweet caramel, hay-like, sort of fruity berry-like scent, whereas the smoke from tobacco is a lot more sharp and bitter, harsh, and of course smoky. And I would say that when you're inhaling it, that it's not as, sweet and likable as the perfume ingredient.
I know you've done some work making artisan cigarettes. When you're adding different materials to the tobacco for smoking, does it change the smell of tobacco drastically? And do those materials have purpose?
I think that the commercial cigarettes are, they're a bit harsher and more bassy, like they're a lot flatter. The cigarettes that you tried of mine have herbs in them, like lavender and damiana and mullein, and so those add a little bit of sweetness to it. And when I've smoked them around other people, they often comment that it smells a little bit like incense, and I think it's because of those additional herbs.
So those herbs that you add in, do those have a purpose beyond smell?
Yeah, well, the damiana is supposed to be sort of like a aphrodisiac. and the lavender and the passion flower are both calming herbs. Same with the blue lotus. Mullein has been used as sort of an alternative to tobacco, so it's supposed to nicely replace tobacco smoking, and it's not as harsh.
Do you think there's a way to bring back tobacco smoking outside of the context of sort of those mass market cigarette companies that are so, ethically questionable? And
yeah, that's a hard call because smoke is a carcinogenic, so we can say that it's not the healthiest thing to do. It's interesting in the early 2000s when the smoking laws started to change in California, people just hated smoke. I remember in Los Angeles, and even incense was just complete taboo. I personally love it. It's something for me that has always been sort of a comfort and something that relaxes me and sort of a pause and a meditation in the day. So I'm not really a drinker, so I'm not one to have the end of the day glass of wine. I tend to smoke and light incense at the end of the day.
It's nice communicating with the gods.
Yes.
Yes.
And myself.
And yourself. That was Persephenie, a botanical perfumer and lovely human being based in Los Angeles. You can learn more about her work at Persephenie.com, and to be clear, neither Persephenie nor I endorse smoking. It's bad for us. Having said that, people do it. Our next guest, Avery Gilbert, is going to tell us all about the aromatics of weed. Avery is known for his seminal book, What the Nose Knows, The Science of Smell in Everyday Life, and now he's turned his attention to cannabis. He's the founder of Headspace Sensory, which is a startup company based in Colorado that is quantifying the aroma profiles of cannabis and hemp.
You're listening to Perfume on the radio.
On lookout FM.
Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, so my first question is a little bit more science-based. So when we're talking about the smells of marijuana, what are we talking about?
To a first approximation, they're terpenes. So we're talking about things that are very common chemicals in other botanical sources, limonene, alpha-humulene. These are found in citrus peel oils. They're found in hops, which is botanically related to cannabis. There's nothing particularly unusual about the individual components. What it is the blend of them.
So what are terpenes exactly? They're molecules? They're aromatic molecules?
It's a term that covers a wide range of shapes and sizes, all built on isoprene units. So if you've had chemistry, it's like little tinker toys. The isoprene unit is the basic building block, and you can stick many of them together in different shapes and classes. Basically, they're very volatile. They're lightweight for the most part, and you find them throughout the plant world.
Much has been made over specific strains of weed, and people sing the praises of this versus that. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, from my perspective, there's just an amazing amount of variability in aroma profile from strain to strain. It's just stupendous. I mean, you have these citrusy, lemony, very sweet strains, and you've got ones that are funky as everything. They're just, woody, earthy, moldy kind of. And then you've got, the diesel and gas components that pop up sometimes. So that's what got me interested in the whole question right off the bat. And then you have them linked to this issue of strains and strain names. And over the years, I've come to be really kind of cranky about the issue of strain names. I think they're trouble for the industry. I think they confuse new consumers, people who be new to cannabis in whatever form it takes. And I think we need to get over it.
How are they trouble to the industry? I'm curious.
Well, first of all, I don't think there's much botanical validity behind these. What you're talking about is strains. People hybridize different strains. You can take Wowie Zowie and cross it with OG Kush, and then you get a hybrid and you name it. But there's no firm botanical genetic definition for what constitutes a strain. Technically, it's a cultivar. That's what botanists prefer to say. And so people are naming these things willy-nilly. Everybody's coming up with new names every week. The consumers just go blind. In some ways, it resembles the problem in the perfume industry, where every year you've got another few hundred perfumes entering the market.
It's like it's an embarrassment of riches, right?
Right. Or it could be a faux riches. If you look at 20 different names, there might be 2 or 3 sort of aroma types in there from a perfumer's perspective. So that's what I want to get at. I want to define aroma types in an easy and accessible way so as to reduce the confusion. I think it comes from the old hippie days, back in the 70s, like, oh, I know this guy in Humboldt, and he's got the most amazing Maui Zowie that he grows on the east-facing slopes and blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine. But once you have any one product with a set of characteristics, be it the high or the aroma or the mouth flavor, what stops you from blending? That's what people have done for years with tobacco, with whiskey, with grapes. You blend these different strains to create a pleasing aesthetic. If you stick with the strain names, then you're sort of, you're going to be a purist, and you're never going to blend. You're never going to enjoy the creative adventures that we enjoy in perfume.
It has literally never occurred to me that this is an option where you just buy your different strains and you create your own blend.
This is the great creative world. Look, I don't mean to be too harsh in the industry. I think in a lot of ways it's come very far, very fast. So, for example, the chemistry has come a long way, especially with the analytical labs testing for the state regulatory agencies. We now have data on hundreds and hundreds of so-called strains. And so we can start looking at chemical composition and start seeing, what are the groupings and so forth. But then the urge is to describe a strain according to its terpene constituents. So you get a list of terpene names and percentages next to it. But it's the same problem as in perfume. I mean, oh, it's got lovely top notes of ylang ylang. Well, you tell me, what civilian has ever smelled ylang ylang? Neat. Nobody.
Totally.
It's
Totally.
So it doesn't help in your communication with your audience, with your consumers. And the same thing, who's smelled linalool or alpha humulene? As you know, from teaching people perfumery, the formula, you can look at it all day long, and it's not going to really tell you what it smells like. You have to get in there and get busy. And I think we need to have an organizational scheme for cannabis aroma in the same way we do for fragrances.
Is there a relationship between the smell and the high?
Good question. I mean, it's a matter of doctrine among cannabis enthusiasts that the terpenes, that the scent of a particular strain that you're smoking will modulate the high. This is one of many definitions of the so-called entourage effect. It's plausible. Sort of like the claims in aromatherapy years ago when I first got into this business. But my response is the same as it was back then. It's like, okay, show me some data. And it's very tough to define even how you do that operationally in an experiment. It's such a huge burst of innovation in this area. Here in Colorado, where every 2 weeks there's a new format of dabbing, vaping, burning, different kinds of edibles. There's even a THC rectal suppository on the market for a while. So it's like,
what?
Oh boy, yeah.
Why?
Yeah, they thought better of that.
Are you a believer in the effects of cannabis on illness, or do you think it remains to be seen?
I think there are some well-documented instances. So you've got the anti-epileptical seizure effects. Pain reduction is plausible. Anxiety reduction is plausible. But again, it wouldn't take that much to document it and nail it down. I think people have been very reluctant to do that. FDA is in kind of a weird space where they're saying, show us data. But then if you make a claim based on data, they're going to come down on you like a ton of bricks. So I think there's also a lot of irresponsibility, frankly, as in the early days of aromatherapy. It's like, cure your liver cancer with Wowie Zowie. It's like, please, just stop.
I imagine as a scientist, it can be a little bit of a head scratcher.
What I found in the 3 studies I've published so far is that people are very consistent in how they perceive these different strain odors, and they've got pre-existing beliefs about them. So we found that there were kind of these citrus, lemon, sweet, pungent type strains, and there were the earthy, woody, herbal type strains. And the citrus lemony ones, people were willing to pay more for, and they also believed that they would get you higher. But we did the analysis. We had a chemist measure the THC content, and there was no relation between the aroma and the THC, which, not a surprise. THC is too big a molecule to be volatile. You're not going to smell it anyway. But somewhere there was this pre-existing belief that this type was more potent than this other type. Where does that come from? Who knows? But that's just like every other consumer product.
Yeah. It maybe comes from the same place. I mean, there's a lot of lore around cannabis, around drugs in general.
That'll slough away with time as a new generation of consumers comes on. On the other hand, I think, and this is probably not going to make me popular, but I think it was a mistake to lead the state legalizations with the whole medical claim, because now everybody and their uncle is making these outrageous, unbased claims for curative properties.
Right.
I see that as irresponsible. But that's now baked into the cake because that's how we got to legalization in so many places. I think aromatherapy has gotten way past that. And it's become people accept those general claims now. And so I think there might be a set of beliefs that do come through the forge of empiricism for cannabis. Yeah, but we have to do the work to get there.
That was Avery Gilbert joining us from Fort Collins, Colorado. If you search Avery Gilbert plus cannabis, you will find some of his research and can download a copy of his first paper, which I assure you is very readable. Chris Gordon is a perfumer and founder of Maison Anonyme. In 2019, he released a set of perfumes called Hallucinex. These compositions were designed to trigger hallucinatory responses, so I invited Chris to join us to explain how. So Chris, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
I wanted to start just by asking you about your perfumes that relate to drugs and sort of what got you inspired to do that.
Well, I'm always thinking about memories and how fragrance triggers memories. And we all know the stories about being taken back, to your grandmother's house or first love or something like that. And I wanted to see if that could be expanded somehow to incorporate maybe more esoteric sort of memories. So I landed upon the idea of hallucinogens and flashbacks from drug experiences.
Which substance did you start with?
The first one I did was DMT, which is the active ingredient in ayahuasca. And that was done for an exhibition that looked at sort of the outer fringes of artistic expression. And so it had, psychedelic artworks, historical artworks, Bob Flanagan and Penny Singer and things like that. And so I scented the exhibition space with that.
And why did you choose DMT specifically? Was it something you were particularly interested in, or?
It was an experience that I had recently, so it was fresh in my mind. Mm-hmm. And for me, it's probably the most esoteric of all the substances that I decided to work with. And so I thought that was a good way in. It's probably the least acceptable to most perfume wearers. Doesn't mean people don't love it, but it's a bit of a shock as a fragrance. So I thought that was a good place.
How do you scent something like that?
So it's a great question. And in doing research, I started looking at the precursors for the drugs and to see how they related to the perfumer's organ. And so what I realized very quickly is that DMT is synthesized from indole, which we all know is part of a narcotic floral or a white floral. And so I started building it around overdoses of indole, which you can imagine is a bit of a shock to people.
Yeah, indole is definitely a pretty stinky smell, but it's also kind of sickly sweet, right? There's a sweetness to it.
It is. And, I rounded it out. I want these to be wearable. I want them to trigger a hallucinogenic response. That's the goal. But I also want them to be wearable. So I rounded it out with some other jasmine materials just to take the edge off. But it's still a powerfully indolic fragrance.
That's amazing. Okay, so after DMT, what did you decide to tackle next?
So the next two that I did were LSD and THC. So THC started with a project that I was doing for a client. They were a weed company and they were interested in doing some scents. We didn't end up working together, but it got me thinking, and I just started smelling samples of weed and thinking about the cannabis scents that are on the market that don't really smell of cannabis. And I wanted to do something sort of hyper-realistic.
Did you take a particular strain?
I did.
Yeah, of course, because we're from California.
I chose Black Domino.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that one.
It's an indica and, very powerful sedative. Mm-hmm. And I researched the terpenes and things like that and built it on that framework.
So it sounds like so far DMT, THC have aromatic components, but does LSD also have a sort of innate aromatic component, or was that more?
It doesn't. No, it doesn't. Yeah. And so that was a little tricky, but I decided that it does have a substrate, and so that I would focus on the substrate. In this case, a sugar cube.
Oh, okay. Clever.
So,
okay.
Yeah, the tagline for that fragrance is "Be the sugar cube."
Better than little pieces of paper, I guess, too.
Yeah, it's a little more evocative.
So what was the fourth one you chose to do?
So there are two more that are meant to come out. The next is MDA and PCP. So MDA is based, actually, the precursor for MDA is heliotropin. And so that's on the perfumer's organ. So it's a heliotropin fragrance.
And what does heliotropin smell like for those who might not be familiar?
It's a vanillic, sort of a plasticky vanillic scent.
Which sounds appropriate for MDA, actually.
Yeah. And I've sort of overdosed that one with musks as well, because the effects of MDA are sort of very sensual. So I wanted to include that as well.
And then PCP. To me, that like, if I could imagine the smell of PCP, it would be like grinding teeth. But that's just that's just my imagining of it. Is there any? How did you approach that one?
So the smell is described as the smell of markers, felt tip markers. And so I built a fruity felt tip marker smell.
It's hard to talk about vice and drugs without, we're obviously not condoning the use of drugs, but I mean, this is a real important part of human experience. People have been drugging themselves from the dawn of man. So, I mean, from a more sort of top line view, how do you reason the connection between perfume and drugs?
So beyond the memory issue and trying to evoke flashbacks or hallucinations, I'm also sort of looking at the way that psychedelics are used therapeutically. And there's more and more research being done now on the uses of LSD and obviously THC for psychological well-being. And so I just sort of took that to its logical conclusion and imagined being able to open the medicine cabinet and choose from LSD, MDA, THC, to choose which drug you were going to use that day.
So you say that the idea is to evoke flashbacks or to evoke the feeling of being high. So how does one do that as a perfumer? Is it the scent memory that triggers the flashback, or?
Yes, I mean it's suggestion and it's the scent memory. DMT, when it scented the exhibition, there were people who were convinced that they'd been dosed just by walking into the space. And then other people who'd never experienced DMT still got this sort of, one person described it as sort of an anxious feeling, this sort of pre-liftoff feeling. Any scent works on a person's psychology. And so you add in the suggestion of this and then identical smells taken from Headspace analysis. And, we're getting into a really interesting area.
Yeah. So I have a question for you that's more about sort of olfactory art in general and the purpose of perfume, because, obviously most people in culture understand perfume as sort of, oh, it smells nice. It's a pretty thing. You can use it to be seductive. But there is a lot of power that scent can have to just make people feel uneasy or disturb, as you just spoke about. How do you sort of reason being a perfumer with things on the market with this sort of discomfort that these scents are potentially causing?
I always think that there's room for a little bit of discomfort. The thorn on the rose. These are all all of my fragrances are meant to be worn. They're meant to be enjoyed. They're about pleasure, creating pleasure. If there's a little anxiousness mixed in with that pleasure, that's adrenaline. That can increase the pleasure even. I think when you get to purely art scents, then you're freed from having to think about how a fragrance needs to perform. Perfumes are expected to perform a certain way, and they have less room, I think, to offend. But when you start to move into an art context, then you're released from all of that, and the scents can just be what they're meant to be.
That was the delightful Chris Gordon, the perfumer and founder of Maison Anonyme. You can learn more about his work at maisonanonyme.com. Now, from substances we consume to the bodies that we hope to consume. Our next guest, Etienne de Swardt, is the founder of Etat Libre d'Orange, which is a perfume brand that has become known for its unconventional approach and iconic perfume releases. Etienne joined us from Paris, and if you listen closely, you can hear some street sounds from outside his office.
I'm just on time.
You're perfect.
I'm just perfect today. Most of the time, all the people surrounding me, they say that I'm so imperfect.
Well, right now you're perfect. So I wanted to start the conversation by asking you about the idea of vice or of sin. How do you relate to this concept at Etat Libre d'Orange?
Vice, what is the definition of vice? Is when you take minimum perspective of distance from the norm. And that's very much, trying to run away from the diktat. Vice as a definition of taking perspective on things on the road the less traveled, where you have no taboo, no dogma, could be the value of vice, as long as it expands consciousness. And vice is one component of Etat Libre d'Orange and the spirit of the perfume house.
Yeah.
But Etat Libre d'Orange is much more than that. We cannot narrow the spirit of Etat Libre d'Orange into vice. I think that the spirit of Italie d'Orange is very much into existentialism. We know that the end is tragic, so in the meantime, let's be foolish, let's be joyful, and let's explore the pathway of drama. So let's be frivole. That could be the French definition of existentialism. To exist means to take yourself out of the groove, to exit. Exit the King is very much the definition of a perfume of Italie d'Orange.
Well, so let's talk about Exit the King. What was the impetus to create that perfume for you?
It started from that screenplay of Ionesco. It's a French writer. And the screenplay of Ionesco is Le Roi se meurt. And I was a true fan of Ionesco long ago. And, the traduction of Le Roi se meurt in English, it was Exit the King. And I say to myself, what a beautiful formulation to say that at the end you die, your self-sufficiency leads nowhere. And you can go very high, but at the end, your biology will tell you that you will fall. To fall with panache was the spirit of the perfume. You need a good perfume to fall. And it's very cynical. Could be part of Italie d'Orange. We love that irony on things. So Exit the King is the irony on your vanity. Vanity is fantastic. It creates movement, but also it creates nonsense. I love that aristocratic fall. If you want to fall, or one day you will fall, so fall with panache and take that beautiful scent with you.
So speaking about falling with panache, one of your perfumes, Attaquer le Soleil or Attack the Sun, is inspired by the Marquis
de Sade, yes.
Yeah, exactly. So what made you take de Sade as a point of inspiration for this perfume?
Obviously, about Sade, he's one of the most amazing philosophers of the 18th century. And he's very much back on stage for that 21st century because he played a fantastic part to fight the obscurantism. So he's a very Luciferian angel. Yeah. Lucifer means to bring light to the people in terms of Latin. Lux ferre, that means that you bring the light to the people. You bring the light, that means the intelligence. So I was a true lover of the Marquis de Sade, and since something like 20 years ago, but I met the great-great-grandson of the Marquis de Sade, and he came at Italie d'Orange. He was a true fan of one of the perfume we used to sell, Fils de Dieu. And I said, I love your perfume house because you have no taboo and you have that spirit of eclecticism. So I would like to do a perfume based on my great-grandfather. And I think, it's cool. But I was not 100% okay to go. But then he did an exposition at the Museum of Orsay in Paris. And then the name of the exposition was Attaquer le Soleil, Attack the Sun. And I said to myself, okay. And I called back Hugues de Sade, the great-grandson, and I said, I'm okay to go on doing a collaboration with Italie d'Orange and Marquis de Sade, as long as the name of the perfume will stay Attaquer le Soleil. What a fantastic mission for mankind. And that was the mission of the Marquis de Sade, to counterattack the gods and to be ferocious against obscurantism with no taboos. He was a true Luciferian angel, bringing light to the people.
Yeah, and quite mistreated for it. He was imprisoned for many years and he suffered for his mission, didn't he?
Yeah, he was a crusader. And his mission has to be carry on in the 21st century. The passion continues. And it was, for Italie d'Orange, it was a wedding made in heaven or possibly in hell. And it works.
I'm curious about how one translates a concept like this into something as intangible as perfume.
Italie d'Orange, we are just a place of collision. So the idea was to get Hugues de Sade to collide with Quentin Biche, the perfumer, at Givaudan. So Quentin was very excited by the Marquis de Sade. And he said, I want to tackle the cistus, the labdanum, because it's something I hate. So it's going to be a kind of masochist attitude. He said, let's play with that darkness of the notes that I don't like. So I would like to tame a little bit the cistus, the labdanum. And so that was the angle of Quentin Biche. And they played it together with Hugues. And Hugues was a good fan of the labdanum. So it was the beginning of the chain reaction of a beautiful collision of two beautiful minds. That idea of, masochist everywhere. Here is your perfume. That was the word of Quentin Biche.
So I'm hoping you'll tell me about another perfume that's quite famous called Sécrétions Magnifiques, or Magnificent Secretions, which you describe on your website as true olfactory coitus. Now, a lot has been made of seduction in perfumery, but this perfume takes it a bit of a step further. It's not really about seduction so much as the act itself. So I'm curious about how that came to be and how you approached that.
In the mid-90s, I was working for LVMH, and I was a storyteller at that time for LVMH. They said, what could be a new perfume for, that was Alexander McQueen, I remember at that time. And I thought about the idea of virus. So it's very up to date now with the COVID. But then I said virus, that's very much also my youth in the 80s, with the AIDS time. So I proposed the idea of virus. And then the code name was 4S, sperm, sweat, saliva, and sang. Sang means blood. And that was the storytelling of the 4S. When you want somebody, but that guy could be dangerous or that girl could be dangerous, but you are ready to go and you would like to embrace all the consequences of blending the miasma. And when you want the other body, you want everything. You want to metabolize the other body and you accept the consequences. So that's the transcendental love. So that was the spirit of the perfume. And in French, we used to have a film. The film was Les Nuits Fauves. And that's, what do you call that? Danger zone of sexual intercourse. And you do not know what could be the consequence of your love. And it's something very transcendental. So that 80s is very into that bottle, into that sécrétion magnifique, wanting the other body and lost in between repulsion and attraction. Mm-hmm. And I love that, what do you call that? That very thin line in between attraction and repulsion. And you do not know where you stand, but you overreact. If you decide one side or the other, you overreact. And that's the, what do you call that? The paradox of mankind. But it's a difficult scent. It's difficult to tame it. But the wake of that perfume on skin could be absolutely beautiful. It's a fantastic work of Antoine Lee. And that perfume is a true human paradox.
It reminds me of how in ancient Greece, desire was considered a destabilizing force, sort of potentially dangerous.
Yeah. And I remember Freud at World War II, he said that he has had to rewrote the entire dynamic psychology. And he said, human beings, we have a true pulsion of death, une pulsion de mort. And what do you say in English? Pulsion?
Impulse to death, I think.
Yeah. And during sexual intercourse, there is that sort of pulsion de mort. It's lost in between a pulsion of life and a pulsion of death. And that's a very Freudian perfume. Sécrétion magnifique. That's diving into your Oedipal love, le complexe d'Oedipe.
The Oedipus complex, yeah.
Yeah.
So Etienne, what brought you to perfumery in the first place?
Hey, when you are lost in translation since 1970, you have to land somewhere. Perfume was a good landing zone.
Okay,
that's the best way to explain, I was not, living my life with a true destiny, vision of myself. I was just collision. I'm very much into wording. My mother, my grandmother, they were literature teacher. In the perfume industry, I love the sincerity of the formulation. I'm a true fan of scent by itself, but I belong to wording. I belong to that literature, and I love the land of what do you call that?
Storytelling?
Storytelling, yes, poetry and everything. So Etat d'Orange is a land of sincerity, but formulation is just the organic consequences of something more existential at the beginning that create the chain reaction. Sincerity is the true motto, and existentialism and that cry for freedom. And then we create an organic reaction on the perfumer, and at the end the formulation is beautiful, but at the very beginning, the poetry was there before the formulation.
In the beginning was the word. It's ironically biblical. Etienne, thank you so much for joining us.
Je t'embrasse. Ciao.
Oui, Marie, will you do this for me?
That was Etienne de Swardt from Etat Libre d'Orange, which translates to the Free State of Orange. If you're not familiar with their work, please do yourself a favor and look them up. It's pretty amazing stuff.
You're teasing me.
While we're on the topic of seduction and sex, we would be remiss not to invite Oakland-based perfumer Lakenda Wallace. With her line, Modern Peasant Beauty, she hopes to enhance our natural beauty inside and out with aromatics that are often sourced from local gardens. We started our conversation with a discussion of the meaning of vice. Here's Lakenda.
It's such a puritanical concept. I mean, there are some things that I do think actually fall under the category of vice. Murder, being horrible to your fellow human, that's a vice. And being horrible to yourself, whether that's overindulging in alcohol or overindulging in gambling so that you're not taking care of yourself, that's a vice. Puritans will tell you sex is a vice. I think sex is nature and beautiful. When you look at the older pantheon of gods, they believed in sex. They didn't try and squash it. They recognized that this was how the population grew. It wasn't vice, it was divinity. And then they put it into their different gods. When you look at the Yoruba, if you're going to reach out to any of the gods, you have to talk to Eshu or Elegba. It's said that he holds the potency or the magic of all of the Orisha. Sometimes he's just in red with his, double-headed axe. And sometimes he's dressed really well and just has a huge phallus. So when they say the potency of the gods, yeah, they're not kidding. But he's the one who, if humans make offerings, he'll take them to the Orisha. He's the guardian at the gate. You have to petition him first to talk to any of the gods. And if you don't, he's a trickster and he'll make you pay. You don't play. But it's interesting because for Christians and Catholics, he's often been associated with the devil. So you'll read some things where they'll say, Elegba is near because you'll smell sulfur, which is totally connected to how we think about the devil in Christianity. But he's actually connected with wormwood.
Wormwood that you use for absinthe, right? Isn't that a...
Yes, it's used for absinthe. It's also an incense. So you burn it. It's used a lot in ritual because it will help you get closer to the gods, probably because you get a little drugged out from it. And he smokes tobacco. So his consort is the Pompagira. Although she is a singular divinity, her divinity is made up of the souls of prostitutes who were human, who have passed on. She comes out a lot in the Umbanda version of the tradition. And for the Umbanda, they don't talk directly to the gods. So the Pompagira will work with humans and help them in these ceremonies to heal themselves. So she helps with sexuality and releasing inhibitions and really being your whole self and really protecting women. And she smokes cigarettes too, but she uses really strong perfumes, especially if they're musky, like a musk scent, because she's a lady of the night. You got to attract them from afar.
Do you think there's a relationship between the Pompagira and Pan?
They are both about releasing inhibition. Pan plays his flute and people relax and dance and lose their inhibitions and start, doing the do as they do. So in a lot of ways, it's like they're working with that same energy of just let go, just be you. There's a lot of gods who are involved in sex in the Aztec. There's Quetzalcoatl, and she's powerful. She's the goddess of sex and of sensuality and female power and creativity and writing. She absolves sins. So she's like so Catholic before the Catholics. I was raised Catholic. So when you go into confession, you start off and you cross yourself and you say, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." And then you can tell them everything. And, the priest will give you a couple of things you need to, say this many prayers and this many active contritions, and you'll be fine. Quetzalcoatl is not so easy. She's like, "You want me to forgive your sin? That's fine. You have to pierce your tongue and stick a piece of straw through it." But at the same time, she's associated with roses and dark chocolate. She's like the ultimate courtship goddess.
Do you consider, I guess sexuality or sort of the sacred communion? I don't know what to call it, but do you consider these themes when you're thinking about or working with smell, Lakenda, like for your own practice?
Absolutely. For me, perfume or scent is not only about how good you smell, but how does it make you feel? How do you walk through your day? Is it helping you through your day or is it not? So my scents and my perfumes are always blended with aromatherapy and essential oils because I really want to bring out certain aspects. I love spikenard. And spikenard is associated with Mary Magdalene. It's said, there's the story in the Bible where a prostitute comes up and washes Jesus's feet with her hair. Everyone associates that with Mary Magdalene. And it's said that spikenard was one of the oils she used and to anoint him. But I associate it so much with Oshun, who's the goddess of the sweet water in the Yoruban tradition, because Oshun is so about feminine empowerment as much as she is about feminine sexuality. But so I associate that with spikenard, because when I wear spikenard, it not only gives that feeling of self and like self-love, really pushes the self-love aspects, but it's got this it's like rose and cinnamon had a baby or something, and it's just spicy and sweet and sensual and delicious. It's like Oshun. It's sexy. It empowers you.
There's a power in owning that sensuality and that sexuality, especially as a woman,
Yes.
when you're feeling it, when you're feeling yourself, you feel like nothing can stop you. Nothing.
Exactly. You'll take those bigger steps. You will try for what seems impossible, or, because you just feel good. And when you feel that way, everyone sees you that way.
I always feel like also when one feels that way, whatever the object is of your desire, the feeling of power is almost independent from that. Like, it doesn't matter if the object of your desire notices or likes you back, whatever. It doesn't matter. It is inherent in you, right?
Yes. I wear perfume because I want to feel sexy. If you notice, bonus. But that had nothing to do with me getting ready in the morning. I didn't look in the mirror and say, I hope he likes this.
Right.
I mean, it is a feeling of being whole within yourself and really appreciating all aspects of yourself.
And perfume is a wonderful mechanism to communicate that.
And to enhance that. And that's the power of scent.
Well, Lakenda, that was a very wonderful conversation. I feel a little bit more empowered in myself for thinking about these things. So thank you.
You're welcome.
That was Lakenda Wallace joining us from Oakland. Her perfume line can be found at modernpeasantbeauty.com. We spent quite a bit more time than we were able to put on air because of time restraints. So if you want to hear a wonderful story about how Oshun helped coax Ogun out of a cave, head over to perfumeontheradio.com and check out our blog. Our next guest is Christophe Laudamiel. Based in Berlin and New York, Christophe is a master perfumer, a scent composer, a lecturer, a writer, and a champion for chemistry. We started our conversation discussing a set of scents he made inspired by the book Perfume, Story of a Murderer by Patrick Suskind. The set of perfumes was released as a box, or a coffret, by Thierry Mugler, and notably contained a scent for the book's climactic orgy scene. Here's Christophe.
So you want to talk about the orgy first?
Yeah, if you can.
For me, an orgy is not necessarily a vice, if people are consenting, of course. So to create the scent of the orgy, we had some watery notes, some fresh notes. We had some notes that are a little milky, some notes that are salty. For instance, in sandalwood, you have in the freshness of sandalwood, next time you smell a very good sandalwood or a very good sandalwood molecule, the top note is actually quite salty. So I use some of those notes. We also have a note in perfumery that smells both of milk and ham, cooked ham. Oh. So it's very good because an orgy or semen it plays at the border of these different areas. And then we had a note which is called putrescine, which is actually found in corpses, but it's also found in trees. In the spring, you go under some trees and it really smells like a waterfall of semen on you. The locust tree, it's called. And then in the middle, I put some cedarwood notes and I put the sweaty notes that you find naturally in chocolate. And then in the middle, you see a hardwood coming to the orgy. It's because in the orgy, you have the shafot in the middle. You remember the guy, Grenouille?
He's on a scaffold. Right? Yeah.
You know, where they do the guillotine and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's these woody notes that you can really show how in a fragrance you can build volumes and a little song and dance. As I say, an orgy might not be a vice. Now, I want to give you a vice example.
Tell me, give me an advice.
In the luxury, in that coffret for the movie Perfume, there is one, is the scent of the Virgin number 1. A scientist at IFF recorded in presence of the parents the smell around the belly bottom of 2 virgins. And you do have some molecules that are emitted by your skin. You can conceptualize that by virgin, they smell different. We have some of those molecules that we use every day in perfumery for other reasons. They happen to be also virgin skin. So we presented that scent to the CEO of one of those large beauty companies. So imagine a 75-year-old smelling this and the guy going, oh yeah, I can see that. Oh yeah, I can see that. That is creepy, I find, no? When people smell, your sense of smell goes directly to the center, you know very well, from the Institute, goes directly to memory and emotion, directly. There's no filter. Or you're like a child, and so you just speak naively. And because people also find it fun, they give you stories. And so you at this dinner so here was more in some royalty dinner. It's a true story, royalty, head of a country. Yeah? And then the uncle is there and you pass some sand. And all of a sudden, that reminds him of some trips he does every year to Thailand and the Philippines. You can see the vice through the sense of smell because even in board meeting, people speak naively, not thinking that from what they say, it actually tells a lot about them. I know by the smell they're smelling and what they're saying. If you don't know perfumery, you don't know what it means. But me, I know because I know where that scent is also found.
You did a perfume also called Club Design. Can you tell me a little bit about what that perfume was about?
Actually, Club Design is the nice atmosphere of a club or lounge. So you have the very nice sofa, red leather, the woods. It's a bit dark. There's a bit grapefruit dancing on top, but just a little bit to give a freshness and a little bit of a mystery or voilà. But it's more the sexiness of the ambiance. It's not about the action. It's about the theater of the action. Now, for me, if you do the scent for a sexy club, is also different if you do the smell for a sex club. I would do a scent for a sex club. It's raw leather, woods, and smoke. Clap.
Would you insert the body in there? I mean, would the body be a part of that perfume?
Not human body, because depending on your mindset, let's say you look at the wrong person. If you have something a bit body-like, just a little bit, it will stink. If you look at someone sexy, it will be Next time you take Parmesan cheese at home and you look at pasta, you're going to, and then you take Parmesan cheese and you look at your own feet or someone else's feet. It's terrible. The visual is very important. So for me, in a sex club, no, because you want to produce those smells. But I could see a little bit of a Barney smell, something where it's not directly human, something that is more a decor that puts you in the mood, or something that's a little bit funky in a way, like a metallic, where you say, oh, wow, what the hell? What is in here? You know, so it could also be fresh because it's going to be warm during the action. So it could be when you arrive and it smells fresh, not clean, but fresh and mysterious, like maybe the very, very green rhubarb smell, but the dark greenness of that, or dark greenness of galbanum, or I could see this kind of thing also in there. I would have to think a little bit, you see. Or a touch of cumin, though, because that's the body smell, but that's a very special one. Maybe
you mean like fresh sweat, like a little bit of a sharp...
Yeah, or a little bite, like a little spice, like a little concoction of spice, like a sex masala.
That was Christophe Laudamiel joining us from his laboratory in New York. You can learn more about his work at dreamair.mobi. We spoke quite a bit more, and parts of our chat that didn't make it to air can be found at perfumeontheradio.com, including how Christophe would make a scent for anger. Now it's time to close out today's episode where we began with the poem. Elizabeth Powell is a poet based in Vermont, and I asked her to read this poem because it reflects what some might say is the logical conclusion of desire. Here she is with her poem, Fumigation.
The door's made of gingerbread, the rats have eaten through. You finger your record albums like frigid women. You could be more silent than silence without much of a fight. I float a red birthday party balloon you let go into the ozone hole. How I once felt my life against yours, 2 pieces of burnt toast. The town had zoned me for you. Now I'm a wetlands. You can't run your cable under my land anymore. But there's nothing wrong with you, just as there's nothing wrong with the sky. I hum like a propane heater, rusted but operational. Nothing loves the world the way a mortal soul can. Yet the very word domestication sounds like a zoo for housewives. Once fumigation was a gynecological procedure. Once you smelled of mint, of truth. Once I loved you madly like a girl pirate. Now I use my sword to pick up moldy, low loft towels from the floor.
That was Elizabeth Powell with Fumigation. In 2020, Elizabeth released a book of poems called Atomizer. It's fantastic. And that brings us to the end of our show. Credits for this episode go out to Maxwell Williams for the snappy title music, Stephen Rimlinger for the melodic interstitials, Cameron at Lookout FM, and always Minetta Rogers. We got the music for this episode from the Open Music Archive, amongst other places. All of the music is in the public domain or used within the doctrines of fair use, or with attribution, and our deep thanks for the community of musicians that make our lives so wonderful. This episode has been produced by the Institute for Art and Olfaction, which is a nonprofit based in Los Angeles devoted to experimentation and access in the field of perfumery. My name is Saskia Wilson-Brown, and I'm the founder of the Institute for Art and Olfaction, and I've also been your host today. We archive these episodes on perfumeontheradio.com, but if you prefer to hear it through podcast, we can help you with that. Download it and older episodes on a podcast provider of your choice and enjoy it in a location of your choice. I suggest a cafe near the river in St. Petersburg, Russia, potentially with a cigarette, maybe a stiff drink. For our next episode, we're going to spend an hour with an icon of olfactory art and scent culture, Cecil Tolas. Be sure to join us for that rather illuminating conversation. And until we meet again, friends, keep it kind, keep it real, and keep it smelly.
You're listening to Perfume on the Radio.
On Lookout FM.